Okay, where were we? I think we were driving this car here and getting ready to shoot some stuff. I have lots to talk about and will, so as to not overwhelm you with stimuli, I think I might actually just play the game, like that's what we're here for about 2 minutes to clear this up, and then I'll talk about all of the stuff that's on my mind for the last however long I've been thinking about doing this. I'm not idle, I'm always stuff going on in my head, and we'll get into that in a moment, but this is just nice to immediately be handling the game. It feels really good. 1 second, let me just check something. Yep, I am recording. Good job, me. Now you can't really appreciate this game in motion just looking at it. I think it is good to pick up now and then and just really appreciate how well they've nailed the physicality of things like driving. That's not what I'm in the mood to talk about today, but it's just something that while just doing this, I'm having fun just in this moment here, and I do just enjoy picking this game up every time. It's one of those things, this game doesn't get old. That's more to the point of what I want to get into today. I just really enjoy playing this, and yeah, I just wanted to get this stuff off of my mind, not have to worry about being shot at while talking about things, so I'm just going to quickly clear up this area. I'm going to leave these guys here to manage that while I quickly get up here. We'll do one more thing and then we can talk about real stuff. There he is. Alright, we showed that guy. Is there another one not on normal? Now we go through this very cool plain hallway. That is more what I want to get into today. Give me 1 moment to actually play for another second, then I'll talk all about this room. I didn't mean to stop here so I could talk about this, but it's a very good spot for us to have stopped. It brings things to mind, and I've been talking to people. Lots going on here that we can go into. I could probably spend an hour talking without leaving this room very comfortably. You know I could, especially if you watched the first level with my broken audio. I can just go on and on. Here we are, we hit this thing, and when I was a kid I thought this was very cool and amazing. The bridge is just light, it comes out of nowhere. Just a fun detail, I like that a lot. Now, the stuff that's actually interesting. Sorry if my voice is low, it's night, I instinctively want to speak lower and that may come through weird in the mic. I hope it doesn't, apologies if it does. Now, what was I doing? 1 moment, the game has to take a second to load in. If I swap the colors, I'll just do that real quick. There we go. Disgusting. Now we back and forth freely. First thought, just something I've had on my mind. I've kind of alluded to this, saying it once or twice already, but I'll just say where I'm going. I say sometimes that this feature was made for me. Where I get that phrasing from, made for me, is Peter Greenaway in one of his talks. He's talking about VHS and DVD players, how they have the remote, and he says, that was made for me, because it gives him the ability to scrutinize things very closely, and more importantly, he almost turns movies into video games the way he talks about them. He's excited by the idea of, like, I control the experience, I am able to, basically, like, if filmmaking is really the director, you have the final say over what appears on screen. Once you have the remote, you are arguably a kind of overriding director, and Greenaway loves the idea of being a man who can redirect any movie that's in front of him. Just imagine him with a remote in front of his DVD player, just skipping scenes and stuff, having fun experimenting with making new movies with that limited input. That's just a very funny mental image, which is maybe a bit of a tangent and a waste of time, but I think this is made for me. I don't do the same thing with it, but this is exactly what I think was lacking in games. Barely relevant, really. I just think it's a fun phrase. They made this feature for me. Like, this was put in as like okay, we can just, it's like a one-off gimmick where people will be playing it and they'll be like, you know, the Mexicans who buy this remake, they're like, hey bro, look, I can make it old graphics, ew, and then they flip back and don't think about it. But for me, it's like, okay, this is absolutely incredible. We now have this like living museum gallery that I can scan through and flip between two sets of sensibilities in rendering the same object in real time. This is absolutely amazing for this kind of retrospective that I want to do with this live, spontaneous thing. I can just, any given moment, show you old Bungie brain and whoever the hell was in charge of this remaster brain, just completely different approaches to something. Now, what was on my mind and why this room has me so excited to talk is, I've been looking at the theories of a certain Austrian named Adolph. Of course, I'm talking about this game about all of this war and violence and titanic structures. I'm of course talking about Adolph Loos, the art theorist. Particularly his essay, Ornamentation and Crime. Maybe just from that name you can already barely see where we're going, but ornamentation is the key theme. Decoration, excessive detail. You see the relevance now already, I'm sure. What he says, Loos, he says lots of things. He begins very politically incorrectly saying that the Poppy one tattoos his face. He tattoos his boats, he tattoos his tools. He wants to put decorations all over everything he's got. And Loos then says that probably 80% of the heavily tattooed men in Germany at his time, I think it was about 1910 or 1908, were in prison, and any tattooed man who dies a free man was just a man who died before he could commit the murder he would eventually commit. The idea, of course, don't let me ramble too much. The idea is that it's a low criminal impulse to want to tattoo. And what is tattoo? It's scroll, it's decoration, it's visual babble. I very much like that phrase. Just a compulsion to cover things in very shallow, if not meaningless, detail. And to go further, of course, he says that human cultures are sort of like humans themselves, where a Papuan is sort of like a human 2-year-old, an ancient Germanic is a 6-year-old, and so on. And then, mature German culture is something like an adult. It has left such things behind, and the more regressive elements of humanity. Both, and I shouldn't say regressive in the sense they've gone backwards, just more primitive, less formed, not as advanced would be a better way of putting it. On the level of entire cultures, like Papuans or individuals within them, like tattooed criminal elements within Germany, have this fascination with ornamentation, of course, this idea of covering things. It's not satisfying until we've made some kind of mark upon it. Loos said a very interesting phrase, very specifically he says evolution, the evolution of a culture is, what is it exactly he said? Something like tracks with the removal of ornamentation from objects of daily use. Basically, how advanced is a culture or people? How much visual babble do they feel compelled to put on their things? And we look at Halo, and on both the level of Bungie, the way that they think things should be, and in the sense of how they picture an advanced society, humanity and the Forerunners who built this giant room. If you don't know the story, I'll quickly catch you up. We've landed on some strange alien construction, and it was built by some great lost civilization, and everything they have is this kind of grey utilitarian to the point shape, and humanity of the future. Look at how we build things. Our guns are these grey utilitarian blocks. Our armor is very much just, built to do its job and nothing else. This nice vehicle, very utilitarian olive. There are no flames painted on this car. Nobody's gun is covered in wacky doodads and color. It's all very to the point. It's very advanced. Bungie, on 2 levels, as craftsmen themselves, they don't want to put gaudy, excessive detail on anything they make. That goes for everything, I would say, from the design of the game. It doesn't make you do pointless, flashy things. The levels are not full of superfluous detail. It's all very much just, okay, what makes sense to be here? What is cool? What can you do interesting things with? And Bungie's conception of a high civilization is very much okay, they're going to look very serious, very to the point, very much, hard lines, purpose oriented, and it would be very strange if, a spacefaring, highly advanced, serious humanity engaged in an existential war were, painting flames on its war machines. I say that because in this game's original PC port, Gearbox Studios did it, another more conventionally American studio, and they added a few touches of their own. And in my opinion, the most offensive is they added a new skin for this warthog, which I swear to God, it's black and it's got flames on the front. So I tell you, even then, you could see just different sensibilities made all of the difference. It's suddenly humanity is this like moronic, tacky, like basically 21st or 20th century America. Like, if they could, they would have put this poor Marine in like a tap out, like 2000s MMA shirt. Now, I've cited Adolph Loos. Now let me cite another mind of just someone I came across by chance today. Some friends were talking about him. Lindy Man, Paul Scalise. I mentioned the MMA shirt. You may remember Scalise said, gaming PCs have the same kind of aesthetic as 2000s MMA shirts, and are probably made for the same kind of person. And you may have heard me already say in different incarnations of this video, not incarnations, installments, that my reading of all of the updated Forerunner design is that it looks like the inside of a gaming PC. And, what is the trend in each case? Scalise didn't really have like a hard definition, that's kind of just how he is, but I would say it's a perfect example of ornamentation. Like, the 2000s MMA shirt is basically a tribal tattoo shirt, and tribal tattoos were what Loos had in mind, and this is again just like a high-tech, this is like a moron's idea of high-tech, but like, thinking like, okay, what would a tribal tattoo look like if it were high-tech? Like, what if a building or a computer had a tribal tattoo? It would look like this. It's visual babble, as Loos called it, just this desire to think like, okay, something's not finished until I've covered it in junk and personalized it, made it mine with this, whereas Bungie think like, okay, it's done because it looks like it does the job it was made for. An object of everyday use which is not ornamented. Like, they're not this kind of thing, but what you're meant to kind of bring to mind is like just a good example, which is very plain, a very striking visual, which I like, is imagine the engineers from Ridley Scott's Prometheus and Alien Covenant. Imagine how they would build. That's basically how Bungie wants you to think about the Forerunners and humanity in Halo. Like, which kind of gun would you imagine the Prometheus guy using? You would imagine probably some kind of very ingenious black or gray, like, utilitarian thing, no wasted anything anywhere. And that's the second point that I'll get into, that Loos's argument was largely economic, that he believed ornamentation was very wasteful, and God, I could very easily rewrite that thing to be about video games. I'm actually of half a mind as like an experiment to just read the whole essay aloud with images from video games to, make you think, both from them and about them. Like, I could screenshot budgets of games and so on to further make the point, people making them. So where I was going, that, yes, imagine what the engineers from Prometheus would build. That's Loos's idea of a high culture. Everything is very, like, worryingly utilitarian. They do not waste effort, but the point Loos makes, which is very important, is that it's not a kind of self-mortification, like, oh no, I deny myself ornamentation, I deny myself tribal tattoos because I'm a big boy and I'm too serious to need them. Like, no, the idea is that if you're really a higher kind of specimen, you just don't want these things, it pleases you. And I do have to say that, like, I'm not saying, like, trying to be an elite is like, oh, I don't need fancy graphics, it's all about the gameplay. Like, no, I think this looks much, much better than this. This is just babble. It's just gaudy garbage on top of everything, and I hate the idea of there just being all of this meaningless excess. I like the to-the-point utilitarianism of this. Everything is what it's got to be, and, anything on top of this is just it messes with the balance, it messes with the intention, it messes with the point. It's very much, it's a well-realized work because it's what it's got to be, and then we draw the line there. And again, Bungie's idea of like, that's how they portray humanity designing things. Not so much the remake guys, but they're still on the same frame, so they can only add so much detail. But like, what is that? That's not there on this one, it looks better for it. Just, what is that? What is these? What are these bolts? What is that? It's just dumb. Dumb, excessive detail. Just pare it down. Looks much better now. So I think I've gotten that point at least roughly across. That's enough for you to think about it. And if you want to look further, that's Adolph Loos, Loos, ornamentation and crime. And I might follow that point up further. And Loos's second point, which I also think is extremely important, is economic. That, two real economic points, one on the production end and the other one being that you get things which last much more if you are not trying to chase what are basically frivolous trends, which is what ornamentation is about, and that's a point which is more relevant to video games than things like furniture or architecture. Just think that like a game which has a very functional look is generally going to be rather timeless, while one which is trying to entertain with novelty for that kind of novelty-oriented audience. You hopefully see where I'm going. It's basically the graphics argument where, a game which is trying to be a graphics game, like advanced visual babble all over the screen, will be outdated almost immediately, whereas, a functional game which is just trying to get the information across. I'm not being a minimalist here, I'm saying whatever is needed. For example, people still play Heroes of Might and Magic 3, people still play... People still play Age of Empires 2, I can think of so many examples like that. I'm still playing Halo Combat Evolved. But who is still playing a game which was bleeding edge, basically ornament-filled, but is now, outdated? Like, who's going to play Far Cry 4? Who's going to play Call of Duty Modern Warfare 1? Who's going to play the first Horizon game now that they made a second? Like, those things really do just age immediately, and that's Loos's point with ornamentation. Like, you get a pair of boots that are, like, decorated in a certain year's fashion, or furniture which is styled a certain way that's in, at the moment, fine china. And, people are going to want to get rid of that when, it was made to satisfy the tastes of a time, which were very, informed socially and so on, and those things move, and, something that was extra satisfying because of all of its incidental detail. 1 year, you wait 10 years, and suddenly it's all moved on, and that plate is now just like junk to you. Whereas, the advanced man of the future, Loos's high culture man, he got a plain white plate. He likes how to the point that nice fine white plate is, and 10 years later, he hasn't changed. It's still a nice functional white plate. He doesn't need a new one. And of course, you see how the economic argument emerges when that applies to everything. The man's clothes, the man's furniture, his home, everything about him. One side, Loos's case is the backwards provincial Austrians as opposed to the fine, fancy, high-cultured urban Germans. This idea is that Austria's gotta constantly, they're happy if things are burning down, they need to constantly destroy things. They have an excuse to update if things are constantly breaking. It's just this constant cycle which feels like a lot of activity because things are constantly being made, but it's ultimately very costly and not efficient because on the one hand, people are constantly buying, and on the other, the people who are constantly making. All of this incidental detail, if that wasn't needed, all of the extra craft work, what they could instead do is make far more functional, plain things and, just get into the factory and bang things out rather than making artisanal knickknacks which are, basically made with an expiration date. It's all this... Everyone is stuck in this very energy-intensive and consuming cycle rather than the rather sparse tastes of the higher culture which allow them to make things which satisfy them for longer and free them up to make more things, and then their productive power that can be directed towards, things which will go outwards. The culture satisfies itself very easily and then has energy to spare, which it can use to enrich itself because it doesn't need to buy so much. It can make things other people will also get. I'm sorry, that's probably not the most interesting tangent, just Loos is a very interesting guy. Now, Cortana is talking, feel free to ignore me and read the subtitles, but I won't stop to talk too much about that, but yes, just transposing that line of thought about fashions and temporal interests to video games, you can very much see how, pardon me, there is an economic case to be made against ornamentation in video games. Just think of how many people it took to make a game back at this time. Bungie were not small, they needed help from Microsoft, but they did this themselves. It didn't take an obscene amount of work. And then think, okay, sorry while that loads again, this scene looks uglier, it ages horribly, like it's now an old graphics scene rather than just a functional thing of its time, and you know, this is more work to make and does not last long. This is less work and is timeless. It's like the decorated china as opposed to the plain white china. A video game like Halo CE is, even if it wasn't really intentional at the time, they were kind of held back. That's a big point with video games. I think a lot of good ideas emerged as products of the time and what was possible, and were not recognized as good ideas because no one really had things to contrast with them, but this is the good white china balance which video games hit incidentally, and basically now everything is an over-decorated ornament and nobody really knows why we do that. And whenever a game does go back, they never go back to a sane white china standard. What they instead do is basically create some kind of hallucinated old standard, which is really just an extremely garish form of ornamentation. Typical, like, ugly, hideous, pixel retro garbage, which doesn't look like any period of games which existed. And they say that that's like, oh, this is functional white china gaming. Like, think BattleBit Remastered, a game I basically bought, played for 5 minutes with friends, and then refunded as a joke. That game is selling itself as white china, like that's basically their marketing campaign. If you look at it, like all of these lunatic morons on YouTube saying like, look what 3 guys have done, they're showing Battlefield how it's done, and it looks so good and it's so simple, but it's actually quite hideous and visually cluttered and awful to look at because it doesn't look like old Battlefield, which was actually alright. Like, the models, like, for the amount of polygons they're using and so on, could basically look like these Halo Marine men, just these solid blocky shapes, but instead they go for moronic Roblox Minecraft men because that looks retro in the mind of someone who didn't actually play older games. And just the color balance and such, the distribution of incidental details like foliage, it's all very, very bad. I really despise it. Pardon me, but yeah, just, it's fake it's fake functional. It's not for people who actually appreciate, you know, economy of effort and sane distribution of detail and so on. It's not allowing them to make more interesting games. They basically made Battlefield as Battlefield already is, but hideous in a way which is kind of faux cheap, faux functional. It's just hideous, it shouldn't exist. Very, very bad. Now, what was the other thought on my mind? But of course that's kind of the main one, that video games could basically learn from this loose kind of functionality, and of course, as I'm always saying with video games, I would say there is arguably a place which kind of does that, and they didn't make a big fuss of it. They don't need to advertise that they're doing it. I of course mean Japan. People say like, oh, we need like AA level production. There are lots of Japanese games which just look basically good enough. They accept a kind of standard which is pretty much like what you're seeing on screen, and yeah, most people are pretty much fine with it. Like, morons on V, that Mexican-infested hole, like to make a fuss over, like, how the ground in Legend of Zelda or the last Pokemon game looks like this, pretty much, and they're like, oh god, unplayable, but, you know, I'm a white person, so I just have to ask, like, why? Why is that unplayable? Does this not look good to you? It's grass, I can tell it's grass. And yes, like, the 3D of this ground, it's like, it's very two-dimensional. I can see the seams, but, you know, again, as I was saying in the first level, that's the level on which I interact with this grass. It's basically a flat surface. I don't have feet which interact with the terrain really dynamically. I just slide across it like it's perfectly flat concrete and I'm on a Segway, and, you know, it looks like that. Any more detail would just create a kind of dissonance between how I move along this space with my Segway legs and the level of detail in the ground. And as I said, Death Stranding is, as far as I can think at the moment, the only game which has really justified that amount of ground depth. Now, as I say that, of course, the Warthog really is an extremely physical beast, this car I'm driving, the Warthog. But even then, would more detail on the ground make it more fun? I think it gets an extraordinary amount of physicality out of this, you know, out of this really two-dimensional ground, and I wouldn't really want it another way. It's extremely fun like this, and again, the kind of simple abstraction of the ground I think actually works well with the exaggerated wuxia physics of this thing in action. It's very much just, you know, it's all a bit unreal, all evenly unreal, and I find that fun. Now I'm going to drive over there and take a minute to look at this little scene they've set up over here, and I'll pause this recording and maybe do another in a moment, or tomorrow, we'll see when. Again, no schedule, but I'd like to do this more. I always have loads of fun when I start recording, and I hope at least someone has a bit of fun listening, and I'm going to keep doing this because I like it. So thanks for listening to this one, and there'll be more soon.